Right now, we get the pleasure of visiting with U.S. Senator Ted Cruz. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Chad, good morning. Good to be with you.
Glad to have you back on the show. It's only Wednesday, and it's already been a busy week. I want to start off talking about what's going on with the president and foreign policy, because that seems to be making many of the big headlines of the day. First, I want to get your thoughts on the strike on Syria. It seems as though the administration is saying, don't worry, we're pumping the brakes. We're not going to rush in to Syria. I think that's a good idea. What do you think about the U.S. role in Syria regarding regime change, the airstrikes, and what we do moving forward?
Well, I agree with you that caution is in order. Unfortunately, the situation in Syria is a mess as a result of 8 years of Obama foreign policy failures, and there are no good options right now in Syria. Bashar Assad, the dictator, is a monster. He has repeatedly used chemical weapons against his own citizens. He's killed innocent men, women, and children. But on the other hand, the rebels fighting against him, many of them are ISIS, Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra. They are radical Islamic terrorists, and from America's perspective, they're even worse. And the very worst outcome that could play out would be for Assad to be toppled and those chemical weapons to fall into the hands of ISIS or Al-Qaeda, because if they had those chemical weapons, they would use them to try to murder Americans and murder our allies. And so that's an outcome we need to do everything possible to prevent. And I believe the touchstone for any military action should be protecting the vital national security interests of the United States. And that should be the focus of the president, and it is certainly my focus and should be the focus of Congress as well.
So the airstrikes that occurred last week, what did you think about those? Do you think they were a good idea? And when does the U.S. act against the Syrian regime? Is it when chemical weapons are used?
Well, it depends what is planned. If the strikes last week were a one-time response intended to deter the use of chemical weapons, that's one thing. If they were the beginning of an escalation and further military involvement and sending ground troops to Syria, that's quite a different circumstance. You know, under the Constitution, the authority to make these decisions is divided. The president is the commander-in-chief, and so he has the authority to make decisions in exigent circumstances when there is an immediate threat, something like an individual strike that we saw last week. But the Constitution gives Congress the authority to declare war. And so if the administration intends to engage in prolonged military conflict, then the president needs to come to Congress and lay out the strategy, lay out a specific plan to accomplish that strategy, and explain how accomplishing that strategy furthers U.S. national security interests. And certainly as a member of the Senate, I will listen with an open mind and consider fairly the arguments made by the commander-in-chief and the plan put forth. But it's a dangerous circumstance, and so I think we need to proceed cautiously with a clear eye on the objective of protecting America's national security interests.
Does your view apply the same when it comes to North Korea? That's also been a troubled space for a
Sure.
long time, but we see at least the ratcheting up, it seems like, of rhetoric between the White House and North Korea. What are your thoughts on potential conflict there?
Well, North Korea may be the most dangerous place on earth right now. Kim Jong-un, the dictator there, is mentally unstable. You know, as John McCain referred to him a week ago, he called him the crazy fat kid, which apparently got North Korean media very upset. And I will say I enjoyed McCain's response. What, they wanted me to call him the crazy skinny kid? But what makes this dictator dangerous is that he has nuclear weapons, and he has a significant stockpile of nuclear weapons, and he has repeatedly threatened to use them and to use them against Americans. And he is testing missiles, ICBMs, delivery systems to try to carry nuclear warheads to the United States. Indeed, he has threatened to attack one city in Texas. Austin was one of the 3 cities he named as targets that he wanted to hit with a nuclear weapon strike. That is obviously very, very dangerous, and he doesn't even need a long-distance missile. We've got 28,000 troops right there on the border of North Korea.
Right.
And so, God forbid he were to choose to use a nuclear weapon against our troops, it could result in enormous bloodshed. Now, obviously, the response to that would be overwhelming and crushing retaliation, and that's necessary for nuclear deterrence. But, Chad, what makes this really dangerous is that ordinary cost-benefit analysis and deterrence doesn't necessarily work with someone who's mentally unstable.
Right. Senator, I want moving off of the topic of foreign policy, I want to talk about the president this morning. I believe he was on Fox Business, and he talked about health care. He wants to get health care done. I think that a lot of Republicans and conservatives want to get health care, the Obamacare taken care of. There's an agreement to repeal it. What does it need to look like? And do you think Republicans will actually get health care fixed? Whatever fixed looks like, will it be fixed in this year?
Well, I think it's critical that we get it done. Republicans have spent 7 years campaigning, promising, if only you elect us, if only you give us the House, if only you give us the Senate, if only you give us the White House, we will repeal Obamacare. The voters have done that, and I think failure is not an option. We have to honor that promise. It is true that the path getting there has been bumpy, that the original House bill didn't have the votes and was pulled down. But, it's worth having a little bit of perspective looking at that. It took Obama 14 months to pass Obamacare. The House bill was on the floor for a total of 18 days. That is not nearly enough time for major legislation that impacts 1/5 of the economy. I think it's critical that we repeal Obamacare, but we got to do it right. We got to do it in a way that actually fixes the problem. And Chad, I believe the test for success or failure will be whether or not we lower premiums. That the central reason why people are so unhappy, why so many Texans are hurting under Obamacare, is that it has caused premiums to skyrocket. I hear every day from Texans all across the state, I can't afford health insurance anymore. I can't afford health insurance for my family. My biggest concern with the initial draft of the House bill is it didn't do nearly enough to drive down the cost of premiums, and we need to do more. And I believe we'll get there. We'll get to yes. I think most Republicans want to get to yes. And I can tell you I am spending every waking moment, night and day, sitting down with House members, sitting down with senators, sitting down with the president, the vice president, and the administration, doing everything possible to bring people to the table, to get them to yes, to focus on common ground. What do we all agree on? What will be effective bringing premiums down? If we can lower premiums, that will be a victory for the men and women of Texas, and it's what I'm working night and day to try to bring about.
What needs to be added to or taken away from the House plan that would drop premiums, that in your mind would drop premiums and get people to that yes, and would it have to go through reconciliation in order to get there?
Well, let me answer it backwards. Let me start on the second piece, which is reconciliation. Right now we are facing blanket filibusters from Senate Democrats. They are filibustering everything. They are angry at the election, and they're engaged in complete obstruction. So I think the only avenue to get meaningful legislation, and in particular Obamacare repeal, passed is going to be what's called budget reconciliation, which has a statutory exemption from filibusters. So it can't be filibustered. We only need a majority, 51 votes in the Senate, to pass it. In terms of the substance, how you drive down premiums, there are principally 5 different tools that we can use to drive down premiums. The most important is getting rid of the Obamacare insurance mandates. Obamacare had 12 insurance mandates written into it, the so-called Title I mandates, all of which are major drivers driving up the cost of insurance. It's a big part of the reason why you and I are paying much more for insurance today. The House bill repealed only 2 of the 12 Obamacare insurance mandates. It left 10 of the 12 in place. I think the first place we need to start is repealing more of them. I'd like to repeal them all, but at a very minimum, repeal more of them and the more costly ones. That's tool number one. Tool number two, we ought to allow people to purchase across state lines so that you can have competition and drive down costs. Every Republican agrees with that, and yet it's not right now in the House bill. Tool number three is that we should expand the use of association health plans so that people in the individual market or small market can join together in large groups and get large group rates, which are substantially lower. Tool number four, we should allow people to pay health insurance from health savings accounts, pay your premiums from health savings accounts, which means you're paying them with pre-tax dollars, which is, again, a substantial reduction. And tool number five, we should use policies to encourage tort reform, such as a bonus in the federal Medicaid matching funds for states that do what Texas has done, that cap punitive damages for medical malpractice lawsuits. All of those will drive down the cost of health care, drive down the cost of premiums, and all of those are ideas that I am actively suggesting to House members, to senators, and the administration. I think those ideas will form the basis of what ultimately passes, and if they do, that they should have a meaningful effect lowering premiums.
One more before I let you go, Senator. I know you have a busy day. Allowing to purchase across state lines, that competition, that was in the so-called third bucket of the House plan. House members say, or at least House leadership says, that's going to have to get 60 votes. Do you think you can get 60 votes and do you think it has to get 60 votes, or can it be done through reconciliation to allow to allow that competition between states?
None of this will get 60 votes. The Democrats are engaged in rabid opposition. They're opposing everything. It is the middle of April, and we still don't have a cabinet confirmed. This is the longest it's taken to confirm the cabinet since George Washington. The position of the Democrats, we saw last week, the Democrats filibuster Neil Gorsuch. That is the first Supreme Court justice filibustered on a partisan filibuster in the history of the country. No justice has ever faced a partisan filibuster. The Democrats were united in doing so last week. Given that, this notion, House leadership floated this three-bucket idea, which for your listeners that are not following the day-to-day on this, they suggested doing a little bit on reconciliation. That was bucket one. Bucket two would be some regulatory relief from the Secretary of HHS. And then bucket three would be all of the good and meaningful reforms that would pass as ordinary legislation and need 60 votes in the Senate. Bucket three is a mirage. I call it the sucker's bucket. There is no universe in which Chuck Schumer is going to allow 8 Democrats to vote with Republicans to help fix health care. So anything put in bucket three, you're saying essentially will never happen. My view is simple. We need to take all of bucket three and put it in bucket one. And your question was, can you do that on reconciliation? Absolutely. One of the things, remember, as you know, I was a Supreme Court litigator before I was in the Senate. My job was to represent Texas, represent private companies litigating before the U.S. Supreme Court, and to win. I have gone and actually read the statute, the Budget Act of 1974, that lays out the process of reconciliation. All of this is permissible in reconciliation, and that's the key to getting it done. And I'm urging my colleagues, let's overcome these procedural hurdles, because that's the only way we can fix the substantive problem and deliver on our promises to actually lower premiums for people who are hurting.
Senator, as always, we appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll be visiting a lot more during this process, and we look forward to it.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you, everyone that's listening. And as always, I encourage you to go to tedcruz.org, tedcruz.org, tedcruz.org. Thanks, Absolutely. And God bless.
tedcruz.org is the website. Thank you, Senator. That's Senator Ted Cruz here on the Chad Hasty Show.